It's only been 1 month and a day since President Trump moved back into the White House, but boy, has he ever hit the ground running or what? Most especially, I think, we would all look at the Department of Government Efficiency, also known as DOGE. This past Wednesday, the president signed a new executive order. Now, catch this one. Ensuring lawful governance and implementing the president's Department of Government Efficiency Deregulatory initiative. That is a mouthful. But what does this executive order cover? Is it a good one? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Donald Kochan. He is a professor of law and the executive director of the Law and Economics Center at George Mason University's Antonin Scalia Law School. Professor Kochan, welcome to Washington Watch. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you for having me, Congressman. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, listen, you've read this executive order. It's a mouthful, just the title of it all. But what's your assessment of it? What is this thing going to do specifically?
This is an executive order which really is at the heart of what executive orders are intended to be. That is, that it focuses on instructing agencies to get their house in order. And what it really means is that every agency is required to do a review of the constitutionality and the consistency with statutory authority of all of their regulations. And basically, check and see, check under the hood and figure out whether or not you've been driving a lawful agency or not, or whether or not there's a lot of junk in there that needs to be removed.
I love this. I just think this is an outstanding executive order. And as you brought up so aptly, this is what executive orders are supposed to do. So what are you anticipating? I mean, we're going to look under the hood, as you say. We're going to see how these regulations and so forth within various agencies, how they measure up to the Constitution. What are you expecting to find under the hood?
I think we're going to find a lot of regulations that simply do not comply with both their statutory and constitutional limits. And the reason why is because we've been operating under a regime in the administrative state for a long time, precedential regime, which allowed for high deference to agency interpretations of their own authority. This kind of deference, which had been known as Chevron deference, was eliminated by the Supreme Court's decision in Lawful last year. And that decision in and of itself says that now judges have a duty, judicial duty to interpret what the statutes mean that authorize agencies to act, rather than asking, hey, agency, are you authorized to act? Because the incentives for the agency are to, of course, justify their own authority. So for decades, we've been operating under this self-perpetuating set of precedents that allow agencies to justify their own interpretation of their underlying statutes. So what we're going to see now is that agencies, in light of these new precedents, they're going to have to take the precedent seriously. There's a few that come into play. One is that Lawful decision, which eliminated the deference to agency interpretations of their own authority. Another is a case called Corner Post, which was also decided the same term, which said if you're harmed, if you're aggrieved by an agency action, you get to sue the agency and make a facial challenge to the agency's rules, even years after that rulemaking occurred. Why? Because you didn't know that it was going to affect you until you're actually aggrieved. So the U.S. Supreme Court reinterpreted what it means to have a statute of limitations under this, which opens up a lot of agency regulations to, in fact, challenge now. And then there's a slew of other cases, including the very important West Virginia versus EPA, which was a decision which has become known as announcing, and it didn't really announce, but it just sort of clarified what's called the major questions doctrine. And this one says that if agencies want to do things that touch on significant issues that impact the economy or society, then the courts are going to presume that Congress would have needed to legislate in a very clear manner to give the agency that authority. If there's not clear authority, we're not going to let the agency go and grab it. We can't say, the SEC can't come in and say, actually, they are climate regulators, when there's nothing about securities regulation that deals with the climate. So this kind of major questions doctrine in West Virginia versus the APA makes a lot of regulations susceptible to new challenges, as well as being beyond what Congress has authorized. What's nice about this executive order, and then I'll turn back to you, is also that it also asks the agencies to look look at not only beyond the major questions doctrine, but also look and determine whether or not you were delegated authority that was unconstitutionally delegated to you. In other words, Congress makes the laws, not the administrative agencies. If it's too vague or too ambiguous, and you're essentially making laws in an agency, you can't do that.
Wow. We've only got about a minute left. What is in this executive order that will help it be implemented throughout the federal government?
So every agency now has to catalog all of their regulations into and determine whether or not they fit any of the categories of concern. And that's in the first section of the executive order. And that catalog has to be done within the next 60 days. So like with everything else that's happening right now, we're in rapid action mode. And so every agency has to determine whether or not every existing regulation is within their statutory authority according to how the statutory authority would be interpreted by courts. What's nice is that the executive order says the best interpretation of your statutory authority, which requires that the agencies look at, well, what would the courts say? And after that 60 days, then they have to go through and look at how to cleanse their house of the bad stuff.
Absolutely amazing. This is one of those executive orders that we may not have ever thought of, but it's the one we've all been waiting on. Absolutely fascinating. Professor Kochan, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for breaking this down for us. We appreciate your time so much.
Thank you for highlighting this issue. Take care.